Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this public webinar on Virginia's Draft 2026 Integrated Report. My name is Joe Marina, and I work as the data coordinator for our water quality assessment team, and I'm based in DEQ's central office here in Richmond, Virginia. I organize and prepare our water quality data for our regional compile the integrated report. I'm joined today by my managers, Amanda Shaver and Sandra Mueller, who will be monitoring the chat as I talk. Today's presentation will be broken into three main parts. First, I will cover background information on the integrated report and water quality assessment processes. Next, I will give a high-level overview of our draft 2026 integrated report. And finally, I'll show a recorded demo of our new integrated report web map that spatially displays the results of the integrated report in an interactive format. If at any point you're experiencing technical difficulties, please contact Heather Esposito, whose contact information is at the bottom of this page. This webinar will be recorded and posted on DEQ's Integrated Report webpage, so if you have any major difficulties during this talk, you can always watch it later. So the purpose of this webinar is to provide a high-level summary of our Draft 2026 Integrated Report. It's also to increase public awareness of our water quality assessment here in Virginia. And lastly, it's an opportunity to announce public comment period for the integrated report through July 15th, 2026. So the public comment period started on June 15th and it'll end on July 15th, which is next Wednesday. You can download the integrated report at our integrated report webpage on the DEQ website. And you can also look at the results of the report spatially using our new map tool. Those of you who registered for this webinar will get, after it's ended, we'll get an email that has a link to the integrated report webpage, so you don't need to write down these URLs. You'll see that this webinar has a chat box, and that chat function should be used to ask clarifying questions if you don't understand something I said or don't understand a word. But if you have comments or questions on the assessment process or the integrated report, those need to be submitted through the formal public comment process. And there's two ways to do so. You can mail us your comments and address them to Sandra Mueller and the mailing address below, or you can email your comments to us, and our email address is deqecology@deq.virginia.gov. And this contact information is also on our integrated report webpage, so you can find it there as well. So to get started, I'm going to talk about our water quality assessment program here at DEQ. The Water Quality Assessment Program is one component of DEQ's continuing planning process. This process is a dynamic management framework and is the cycle of compliance and evaluation of state surface water resources. The primary goal of this process is to maintain Virginia's water quality standards. And that's why you see Virginia's water quality standards at the center of this water wheel. So looking at this graphic and walking through the planning process, let's start at the top with water quality monitoring. So Monday through Friday, DEQ staff are out in the field collecting water quality data. That data is then used by our assessment staff to generate the integrated report. And in the integrated report, we identify waters that are impaired for their designated uses. Those impaired waters then have to have cleanup studies, which could be a TMDL or a watershed plan, to figure out the appropriate, amount of pollution or of a given pollutant that could enter the water body while maintaining its designated use. Once the cleanup study has been performed, we develop a cleanup implementation plan, which plans for actions needed to restore the water quality. And then lastly, we implement those control measures, whether they're permits, best management practices, grants, or cleanup actions. moving to the integrated report, why do we do the integrated report and why do we do water quality assessments? Well, we generate the integrated report because we're mandated by both state and federal law to do so. So the Clean Water Act is the federal legislation that requires all states complete an integrated report. And then here in Virginia, we have WQ MIRA, which stands for Water Quality Monitoring Information and Restoration Act, that also requires us to perform this assessment and generate the integrated report. The integrated report provides a snapshot of the health of our surface waters, and in addition, it determines if waters are meeting their respective designated uses. This integrated report happens every even-numbered year, and the data window is a 6-year assessment window. We have assessment staff at our regional offices all across the state who perform our water quality assessment, and then our staff here at central office synthesize their work into the integrated report. For the 2026 integrated report, the data window is January 2019 through December 2024. The draft IR integrated report was published in June, so last month, and we're now in the 30-day public comment period. Once that period closes, we respond to all the comments, incorporate any of the edits we need to make into the integrated report, and then we'll submit the edited integrated report to EPA for approval in fall of this year. So the central idea behind our water quality assessment is to determine if designated uses are being supported in our surface waters. So what's a designated use? Well, the easiest way to think about it is it's how waters are used. And in Virginia, we apply 4 designated uses to all of our surface waters. And those are the 4 in blue: aquatic life, recreation, wildlife, and fish consumption. And in addition, we have 2 designated uses that are conditionally applied to specific waters. So shell fishing designated use is only applied to estuarine waters with the correct salinity regime to promote the growth of shellfish. And our public water supply designated use is only applied in surface waters where there is a public water supply intake. I will point out that the asterisk next to aquatic life is there because in our Chesapeake Bay waters, we do have specific subcategories of the aquatic life use, which I'll talk about in a couple slides. But as you can see, we can't necessarily measure these designated uses directly. So we have associated parameters which we measure in our water samples to determine if these designated uses are being met. And these parameters that just popped up on the screen aren't an exhaustive list of all the parameters. They're just some examples to give you an idea of what we would sample for that designated use. And as I said, in the Chesapeake Bay, we have special subcategories of the aquatic life use. We have 5 of them: open water, deep channel, migratory fish and spawning nursery, and shallow water baygrass use. And these are slightly different from our other designated uses, as you can think of them more as like habitats. So this graphic shows you where in the bay these designated uses are located. And just like our other designated uses, we can't measure these directly, and we have associated parameters that we measure to determine if these uses are being met. And for the most part, dissolved oxygen is the main parameter, but we do have other parameters that we're using as well. And for instance, our shallow water baygrass use, we measure submerged aquatic vegetation acreage as well as water clarity acreage to determine if that use is being met. So now that we have a better understanding of what designated uses are and what kind of data we're looking at to determine if those uses are being met, it's time to move on to how we categorize parameters and the designated uses. And broadly speaking, we have 5 major categories that we assign to our designated uses and parameters. The first two, Category 1 and Category 2, are fully supporting waters. Category 1 waters means that all of the designated uses that are associated with that water, we had data for, we had enough data to test them, and they're all supporting. A Category 2 fully supporting means that we were only able to test some, but not all of the designated uses, and the ones we did test were supporting. Category 3 is insufficient information, and this can occur when we don't have any data for a water body or we don't have enough to perform our assessments. And the last two categories are both impaired categories. Category 4 is an impaired parameter water, but it does not need a TMDL, and that's the cleanup plan. And that's most of the time due to the fact one has already been created. And then we have our Category 5 waters, which are impaired, and a TMDL is needed. And I'll point out that the 303D impaired waters list is strictly limited to Category 5 waters. So now that we understand our designated uses, parameters, and categories, I'll give a high-level overview of our assessment process. So the first thing we do is we divide our water bodies into assessment units once we have monitoring data for that water body. So you could think of a stream and we chop it into 5 pieces, and that would be assessment unit 1 through 5. And these are truly the functional units of our assessment. But we don't arbitrarily determine the shape of our assessment units. We have to consider the size of the water body, the salinity, the water body type, and water quality standards when we're creating these assessment units. And in the Commonwealth, we have over 8,000 assessment units. So once we have our assessment unit situated, we can perform our assessment on the data, which we use a corresponding methods to do so. And those are based in our water quality assessment guidance and also in our water quality standards. And our standards tell us the duration, magnitude, and frequency by which an impairment is reached. And after we've finished our assessment, it's time to synthesize those results up to the assessment unit level. And I like to think about this process as a bottom-up approach. So I've created a hypothetical assessment unit here, and we're going to start at the bottom. And so we start with the parameter of bacteria, which is used to test the recreation designated use. We assessed our bacteria data and we saw that it was impaired. So the designated use that's associated to recreation is also impaired. We then move to temperature and we find that we have great temperature data. There's no exceedances and no impairment, so it's fully supporting. So the associated designated use would also be fully supporting. So now that we've determined the categories for our designated uses, it's time to give an overall assessment unit category. And we always give it the worst score, or another way to say that is it only takes one designated use impairment to impair the whole assessment unit. So even though we had a fully supporting aquatic life use here, this is an impaired assessment unit because recreation was impaired. So now that we understand the assessment process, we can talk about the data that went in to generate the 2026 integrated report. DEQ staff collected data at over 3,500 stations across the state. And we also received data from external monitoring partners. Approximately 50 different groups sent us data. And this is what that looks like spread across the state. And so these are all the stations that were used in our integrated report for 2026. The different shapes correspond to our different monitoring networks. And so to give you an example, the first one, the brown box with the black dot in the center, belongs to our ambient monitoring network. And this network uses a 6-year rotational monitoring schedule. So 2 years that station is sampled, 4 years it is not. And the purpose of that is to provide a comprehensive geographic monitoring across the whole state. So these are all of the data stations, and a station is just GPS coordinates that were used for the integrated report. But to highlight the external partner stations, we received data from almost 1,400 distinct locations from either volunteer groups that may or may not have received our citizen monitoring grant, as well as other agencies. And two of our big partner agencies that we received data from are the Virginia Department of Health and the United States Geological Survey. If you would like to get involved with our external partner monitoring, you can apply for the Citizen Monitoring Grant. The request for applications is currently up, and applications are due by August 31st. And you can always nominate a water body for DEQ monitoring, and nominations are accepted January through April of each year. And if you want to learn more about how to get involved with monitoring, you can look at the DEQ webpage, Monitoring Partner Resources. And lastly, if you are curious about the data that we get sent from external monitoring partners, you can look at all of that in the Virginia Data Explorer, which is where we house that data. And that can also be found on our External Monitoring Resources webpage. Okay, so now we're going to move into highlights of the 2026 integrated report. So to start, we'll give a statewide overview of our three different water body types. So the columns of this table correspond to our water body types. We have rivers and streams, which are reported in miles. We have our lakes and reservoirs, which are reported in acres. And then we have our estuarine waters, which are reported in square miles. And I would like to point out that our estuarine waters include estuarine waters like Back Bay and the Chesapeake Bay, but they also include our Atlantic Ocean waters as well. We group those in with our estuarine waters. The rows of this table correspond to our different assessment categories. So we have fully supporting, impaired, not assessed, and then lastly, we have the total, which is simply the total area of that water body. So starting with rivers, we have about 4% of our rivers are fully supporting, about 16% of our rivers are impaired, and about 80% of our rivers were not assessed or have insufficient information. And that might stand out, and the reason that that number is so high is because 65% of Virginia's rivers are first and second order streams. So they're very small and hard to access, and they're not great to have fixed stations located at. So Virginia has developed a probabilistic monitoring program, which provides an important complement to our fixed station network that I was showing you previously. This probabilistic program employs a random site selection to produce statistically unbiased estimates of water quality conditions, and it ultimately enables us to provide broad regional characterization of overall ambient conditions. If you'd like to learn more about our probabilistic monitoring program, you can read about that in the probabilistic monitoring section of the integrated report. Moving to lakes, we have about 8% of our lakes which are fully supporting, about 90% are impaired, and 2% are not assessed or had insufficient information to perform an assessment. And lastly, moving to our estuarine waters, we had about 11% which were fully supporting, 75% which were impaired, and 14% which were not assessed. And to compare these results to last cycle, we see that rivers were at 4% fully supporting for 2024 and 2026, and we also see that the impaired waters stayed the same. However, for our lakes, we did see a shift where 3% of our fully supporting waters moved to impaired for the 2026 cycle relative to the 2024 cycle. And lastly, our estuaries remained similar as well. And I just want to highlight that for for example, in our estuaries where we see the 11% in 2024 and 2026, that's not saying that there was no change at all. What it's saying is that the amount of newly impaired waters essentially was counteracted by the amount of waters that we delisted or removed from the impairment category. So delisting is when a previously impaired water body is found to be supporting, and this could be a single designated use or it could be multiple designated uses. And for the 2026 cycle, we had 406 new delistings. 73 of those were full delistings, meaning that that water body now no longer has any impaired designated use on it. And then we have 333 segments that were partial delistings. So one of the designated uses that was previously impaired is now supporting, but we still have impaired designated uses on that water body. And in the year 2002, we started tracking our delistings. And this graphic here, which is pulled from the integrated report, shows the cumulative amount of delistings since 2002, or since the 2002 integrated report. The dark green corresponds to fully delisted waters, and the light green corresponds to partially delisted waters. So now we're going to dive into the three different water body types and look at them in more detail. And so we saw that across the two cycles, there weren't that many changes to our riverine assessments overall categories. But let's look at the leading parameters that are associated with impairments for these water bodies. So you'll see graphics like this throughout the integrated report, and I'll walk you through how to interpret them. So on this graph right here, the x-axis or the bottom axis is reporting the the area of the water body. And because we're looking at rivers, this is going to be reported in miles. And then on the the y-axis, we have our different parameter groups. So bacteria, macroinvertebrate benthic community, dissolved oxygen, pH, temperature, and water column toxics. I do want to point out that these graphs do not show the fish tissue metals or toxics in them. We synthesize that separately, and we will get to those slides after we go through these three different water body types. But just want to point out these graphs are not including the fish tissue information. So how to interpret this graphic? Well, we could start with bacteria, and we see that there's two different colored bars. There's a dark purple bar, which corresponds to impairments where a TMDL or a cleanup plan needs to be developed. And then we see light purple, which corresponds to impairments where a TMDL has already been created. So what you could say is that bacteria is leading bacteria is attributed to 12,000 miles of riverine impairment across the state. And of that 12,000 miles, approximately, 2,000 needs TMDLs to be developed, and 10,000 already has TMDLs developed for them. And you can apply that logic to any of these parameters. So moving over to lakes. Lakes was the water body type where we did see some changes between 2024 and 2026. We saw roughly a 3% increase, which corresponds to about 3,500 acres in impaired lake acreages. And you can find all the information on new impairments in Appendix 1B of the integrated report, which is a list of Category 5 waters that are newly impaired. And looking at the parameters that are leading impairments in our lakes, we see that dissolved oxygen is a common source of impairment in our lacustrine environments, and that only 5,000 or so acres have TMDLs developed for that impairment. And lastly, looking at our estuarine waters, again, we didn't see major changes between cycles to the overall impairments. But I do want to point out that the estuarine assessments do include our Chesapeake Bay criteria assessments. And looking at the associated parameters here, we can see that dissolved oxygen, so low dissolved oxygen and lack of submerged aquatic vegetation coverage are the leading causes, or two of the largest causes of impairment in our estuarine waters. But you'll also notice that for dissolved oxygen and SAV, most, if not all, of the waters are covered by TMDL, and that's because the Chesapeake Bay TMDL is addressing these impairments. So now looking specifically at fish consumption use assessments, DEQ collects fish tissue data from about 85 sites every year. Those samples are analyzed for toxics and metals, and a subset of these routine fish tissue sites are also monitored for PFAS in about 50 sites per year. And when we look at the impairment results for this fish consumption use, we didn't see major changes between cycles. Mercury and PCBs are still the leading cause of fish consumption impairments in the state. However, what's novel to this integrated report is it's our first cycle where we're listing impairments for PFAS in fish tissue, and specifically PFOS. So these graphics on the right are similar but slightly different from the ones we were previously looking at. Again, on the x-axis, you have the area of the water body, but rather than plotting parameters, this is plotting designated use impairment. So for instance, in the top graphic for our rivers, we have about 4,000 miles of rivers that are impaired for fish consumption use, and 850 or so of those river miles already have TMDLs developed to address that fish consumption impairment. And if you look at all of this fish consumption impairment data on the right in this graphic, 97% of that is attributed to mercury and PCBs in fish tissue. So those remain the leading cause of fish consumption impairments in the state. But our new listings that were based off of VDH fish consumption advisories due to PFAS contamination in fish tissue added 134 miles of rivers, almost 2,400 acres of lakes, and 15 square miles of estuaries to these graphics, or to the overall fish consumption impairments. And looking at these PFOS impairments in a little more detail, we have on the left the Chickahominy VDH Fish Consumption Advisory, which includes the main stem of the Chickahominy, as well as White Oak Swamp. And then on the right, we have the Occoquan Fish Consumption Advisory, which includes the main stem of the Occoquan, part of the estuarine portion of the Potomac River, and then some smaller streams, including Broad Run, Bull Run, Cub Run, and South Run. So once we've identified waters that are impaired, we then have to generate a cleanup plan and an implementation plan. The cleanup plan we can refer to as TMDL, or total maximum daily load. And these determine the amount of a pollutant that a water body can receive without exceeding its water quality standards. Once we know what that number is, we can then develop implementation plans and practices that will result in water quality improvements. And once those improvements are met, we can then remove those waters from the 303D list. The draft 2026 integrated report includes the list of impaired waters prioritized for TMDL development through 2028. The IR lists all of those waters individually, but I'm just highlighting this map here that shows it graphically. And to just walk you through how to interpret it, this red polygon right here is the James River estuary, And this kind of purple hatching corresponds to fish consumption use. So in this tidal portion of the James River or the James River estuary, our TMDL team is prioritizing fish consumption use TMDLs. And in addition, you can learn more about our implementation plans and program in the integrated report. And you'll see this graphic, this map in the IR as well that shows past and current implementation project watersheds. So the light blue is our past implementation watersheds. The dark blue is our current implementation watersheds. And the kind of pink cross-hatching corresponds to some success stories. And you can learn more about these on our Water Quality Success Stories webpage. So now we're going to talk, I'm going to point you in a couple ways as to how to visualize the integrated report results. New to this integrated report, we now have a dedicated web application, the IR web map that my colleague Cleo Baker created. And it's a way to spatially review the results of the draft and final integrated reports. In addition to this application, there's two other tools that you could use to look at the results of the integrated report. DEQ has an environmental data mapper application that has the assessment results as well as a whole plethora of other spatial layers and information. And then you could also use EPA's How's My Waterway to look at these assessment results. But one thing to note is that we only send that information to EPA once the integrated report is finalized. So you will not be able to see draft results in EPA's How's My Waterway, whereas in our new IR web map, you can visualize the draft results. So after this slide, I'm going to play a pre-recorded video that Cleo made walking you through how to use this IR web map tool. You might need to turn the volume up a little bit as the audio is kind of soft. But then after this video, I will put up the public comment slide. And after that, we will conclude the webinar.
Hello, I'm going to provide an overview of how to use the Integrated Report web map, which is a supplemental service to provide a condensed but more in-depth view of our assessment data beyond the plethora of data layers found on our Environmental Data Mapper, or EDM. The IR web map displays additional details such as all associated parameters, not just causes of impairment, as is found on the EDM. With their assessment status and additional details where possible, DLIST details and associated TMDL information where applicable. I'll explain a few key features and hopefully give you enough information to start your own data exploration. The link to this application can be found from our Integrated Report webpage as well as from our Open Data portal. If you have any trouble accessing the link, please contact Cleo Baker using the link to my contact information from our IR webpage. Let's dive in. There's a data disclaimer that you must agree to in order to proceed into the WebMap application. There are 4 separate but linked pages of assessment data that you can examine. The data from each can be reviewed in any order. The introduction page gives an overview of the data as well as links to other information and tools that can assist in your data discovery journey. I also want to point out there is a web navigation help box that gives tips on how to use this web map. While it is possible to explore all of the data found on the other pages from here, each page is set up to cater to the data type that is specified in the banner. Use the address bar to find data such as a specific water body name, city or county, or an address. You may need to move your map a bit to see the pop-up fully. Pop-up has an option to show related data if you click on a water body, as well as the number of data layers displayed if you click freehand. To view more of the map, click the arrow at the top center of the text pane. Click the arrow again to bring the text pane back. This applies to each of the 4 pages within the web map. From the map, you can turn on or off map layers. You can view the legend. You can also change your base map background from the image gallery. Data selections and views made here are carried forward on subsequent pages, so you can use that if you wish, or clear your filters to start fresh on a different data page. Moving on to the Assessment Filters and Summaries page, you can filter results by specific water body names, or if you know stream code or station ID, within the search bar and the table pane. Or you can use the search filters to the left to filter by specific cause, selecting one or more cause of impairment. And your filter results change based on your selection for each table. Or you can select by source of impairment, also using one or more selection criteria. In the DList and other details page, There are links to our D-list provided in PDF format. The search function here lets you choose the parameter name that has been delisted from the current assessment cycle, meaning removed from the 303D list, and filters the water layers by matching criteria. In this case, we've selected E. coli as the parameter that was delisted this cycle, and we can view the details for that parameter delisting. The TMDLs and Beyond page shows where we have approved TMDL studies and for what pollutant. There are links to further information related to the TMDL process and data, but here you can view our assessment data and see where we have parameter category 4A impairments that have an approved TMDL study, or parameter category 2C parameters that were previously impaired as part of a TMDL but are now meeting their water quality standards criteria. From the related data, you can view all of the associated parameters and see their assessment status by the parameter. So in this case, dissolved oxygen is parameter category 2C, which means it was formerly impaired but is now meeting, but it was part of a TMDL study. Estuarine benthics, or bioassessments, is category 5A, indicating that it still needs a TMDL study. Fecal coliform is category 4A, meaning that it is part of a TMDL study with an approved TMDL on it. Seagrass has taken the place of aquatic plants as the parameter name. So in all cases where there used to be aquatic plants as the parameter name, it has been replaced by seagrass, whether it is impaired, as in this case, category 4A covered by a TMDL, or category 2C, meaning that it was previously impaired, covered by a TMDL. If you have any questions or problems with the functionality of this web map, contact Cleo Baker using the email address provided in the web map tips from the introduction page or from the integrated report webpage. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Again, the public comment period is currently ongoing, and you will have until next Wednesday or July 15th to get those comments submitted to us. And again, you can send them via mail or via email, and all this information will be well, it is included on the integrated report webpage, and that link will be sent to you after this webinar is concluded. And with that, we will conclude the webinar. Thank you again, and I hope everyone has a great day.